I guess we will start with the biggest story that has been taking over the hockey world over the past couple of days. And that was erupting from the game between the Washington Capitals and the New York Rangers, where Tom Wilson, a noted pest, whatever you want to label him as, kind of like your bigger, brawnier version of a Marchand with slightly less offensive skill. He gets under the skin of the opposing team. He uses his physicality to impact games, sometimes for not the best reasons. And he got into it again with some rough stuff with Pavel Vucinovic and also Artemi Panarin, who will not be returning for the rest of the season. And I don't know if I had seen hockey Twitter in such a blaze than when the NHL Department of Player Safety announced that he was only getting a $5,000 fine, which is the maximum penalty based on the current CBA agreement. Um, but no game suspended for someone who has been known as a repeat offender. And I guess first, Max, I'd want to hear your take on what you thought when that ruling came down.
Yeah, it sends a message that this isn't something the NHLPA is looking down on or trying to prevent, was my main thought, that they're more or less okay with what he did and just going with a slap on the wrist.
The part that really shocked me was it's one thing if he's roughing up, I don't know, like a Corey Perry type or a like a third line grinder on another team, right? But this is Artemi Panarin on the New York Rangers, your biggest American market with one of your biggest potential stars on that team. Obviously, an international player, so not the same level, but like a really solid player. And he gets roughed up, and there's really no penalty to pay for Wilson.
Yeah, a really important player to that team. I think he's their leading point getter. He's averaging like 1.4 points a game or something this season, close. So, really important player to the team. I mean, one of the biggest hockey regrets in our lifetime is the what could have been on Sidney Crosby's career because of that career changing injury that he had to deal with for several seasons. Can you imagine if Tom Wilson did that to Connor McDavid and we lost out on some amount of health of Connor McDavid? They're one of my favorite things about hockey is the physicality and the blurred lines. I will never forget the look on my roommate's face from America when I explained to her what would happen to you if you went in too roughly against a rookie, a prospect, like a smaller guy, what the team of that player would do to the offender. And I love that about hockey. I think it adds a really interesting wrinkle and 90% of the time generates a good culture. And that's part of the story here. The New York Rangers did not have that returning judge or enforcer, whatever you want to call it. So that's part of it. There's no one to step in there. And so it's a guy like Panarin who somehow ends up in the fold, and there's still no one to really mess with Wilson till the next game.
Yeah. The thing I would say before we talk about what came next is there are a lot of people who have the take where that's just hockey, right? And that's a big piece that has gradually decreased from the current game is you don't have these guys like Wilson anymore who go in and just go after the other team's good players, use their physicality to really impact a game, especially after the whistle. And that's how like the game has always been and should be. And what I would say to that is, A, the game is changing and you got to adjust to that. But also just the fact that this guy has been known for doing intentionally dirty acts in games and that he did not even get a 1 game suspension. And you see other guys' rulings coming out in the following days for acts similar or even less heinous getting game suspensions. It just was so startling to me that like this most controversial figure got off with a slap on the wrist. And that was the part that really stood out to me.
Yeah, the only suspension I can really think of off the top of my head this season was against Alex Edler for the injury he put on Hyman. And I think it was Kevin Bieksa, his former teammate, who pointed out, like, it's a split second thing. There's a guy going past you, and you as a defender do not want him to go past you. You stick out your leg on reflex, but it's a very dangerous play, and it injured Hyman, so he got a 2-game suspension that for something totally accidental, unintentional. So something like that kind of behavior by Wilson seems far more egregious to me than that, and Wilson a far worse repeat offender. So I found myself agreeing with the tone of the New York Rangers statement that this was a horrible decision by the NHL Department of Player and Safety. I don't know if I'd have gone so far as to call for the firing of George Peros, but the most shocking part of this whole series of events to me is what came after the New York Rangers statement, the fine for that statement of $250,000. Now, you've pointed out that they hit Wilson with the maximum fine that they could, but there's something just from a macro bird's eye view when you look at this situation roughly, like, okay, you're fining this guy $5,000 for ending the New York or injuring the New York Rangers best player for the rest of the season. I don't know how long he'll be out. And when the team complains about it and is angry about it, you're fining them to, what is that, like 2,400 times more or something?
Something rough math is a lot more. And it's obviously like finding people who can pay it, like that Rangers organization that's pocket change to them. But it's, again, the message. The part that's so wild to me is because it's hockey, it's not as big of a story as it should be, but this is the largest grossing market in a major North American sport, where the leaders of that market are actively speaking out against one of the departments of the league. You would never, ever see this happen in the NBA or the NFL or the MLB, because those commissioners run a tight ship in the fact that just nothing usually squeaks out. You'll see in the NBA, coaches, people criticize the officials. That's become common practice. But really, like, to have an issue like this where like you actually have a team coming out and actively going against the NHL, you knew Bettman was gonna come down with a pretty heavy punishment. And I'm surprised it actually was as public as we saw. You did see the general manager and the president of hockey operations of the New York Rangers also being fired. They said that was not related. I don't buy it for a second. There's got to be something there that happened, because this was before the fine. I'm guessing James Dolan, right, is not the most revered or liked owner. To be blunt, the Knicks fans hate him. Also owns the Rangers, and I'm sure he didn't like that his two guys who he's trusting to run this organization are going against the NHL, and that's just going to cause a lot of headaches for him. And so you imagine that he had to cut those guys because they went and okayed a statement that was going to bring a lot of trouble for him. And so it's it's crazy to think that so much punishment has come down now on the Rangers side, when it was an initial act that they were right about. It's kind of thinking like, you can't say that. You're right, but you can't say that.
Yeah, I do buy it that the firing and the timing was coincidental. Maybe it was accelerated just in the heat of the moment, and the plan was to wait till the Rangers played the last 3 games of their season. I don't agree with the reasoning that like them not making the playoffs is this big disappointment. If you look at the division and the teams that they're up against, you knew it was going to be a really tight division that had a lot of teams that were just deeper, better, and with more playoff experience and more veterans who were still close enough to their prime to play better hockey throughout a season. And you look like the New York Rangers decided they were going to do a rebuild. The GM, assistant GM, like 2 years ago. And I think according to that timeline, they're in a pretty good place with the draft picks they've acquired. Guys like Lafreniere, Fox, who you mentioned earlier, looking like a ridiculous point getter already. Their goaltending seems to be shored up. And the aforementioned Panarin has been a fantastic free agent return sign for them. So I think that's bloated and unfair expectations for this Rangers squad to have made the playoffs, but I do buy the firing.
Mm.
So we get to the last leg of our drama here.
Yeah, so we move into the retaliation, the expected retaliation from the New York Rangers. And there was talk about them signing a couple guys to go and fight Wilson or call up a couple of goons from the minors. But a line brawl on the opening faceoff and then another one later in the first period. I think Washington there's that great photo circulating where they had 6 or 7 guys in the box all chilling due to the fighting majors. And it was just a gong show in pretty much the entire game. As soon as Wilson went on the ice, you had guys going after him, and he leaves with a quote unquote injury. It's a great call by Washington to get him out of there.
I'm surprised they dressed him, but maybe it was just to give maybe it was like an admission that, yeah, okay, take a couple swings at him, get it off your chest.
Yeah. And then, because if it's not that game, like it's something where every team would kind of be waiting, but especially New York, to like, no matter when the next time he's on the ice against him, they're going to go at him. So it's kind of like you got to get it over with. And I thought it was just funny. No one would fight Chara. He was skating around looking for guys, talking to the official while there were a couple scrums going on. He's just a big wrecking ball, and no one really wanted a piece of him. I thought that was funny. He actually got kicked out of the game a little bit later on. And then the thing was, with this like craziness going on, it really overshadowed a really cool and sweet story where TJ Oshie scores a hat trick in the first game after the passing of his father. And they were honoring Coach Osh that night, and really like a special moment for him that was overshadowed by all of this nastiness. And so I guess before we wrap up, I wanted to really touch on that and say congrats to TJ, because that was a really cool night at the end of all the darkness.
I'll add one last closing note. I'm a little confused to find myself in this position, but I'll stay in it to 2 points in the defense of Tom Wilson. You mentioned at the start that just about how this hockey's always been like this. And the one thing I'll disagree on is Tom Wilson actually gets points. He can play the game. Like, he's sitting at 33 points in 44 games this season. So I think if you look back at like guys like a John Scott, for example, the new breed of players, like I think you find Wilson a lot more closer to a Marchand or a Kadri than a John Scott or earlier type enforcers. So that is one way the game has changed. Like that role still exists, but the level of skill and offense required to step in and fill that role is much higher. And secondly, while I was watching the in-between periods, they mentioned that Wilson did reach out to Panarin to check in that he's okay. So it might be, I don't know. I'll say it in his defense. If you want to respond to close out, that's fair enough.
Okay, my initial reaction to that is it feels performative. Although what I will say is that he is a guy where it feels like he turns it on when he steps on the ice. It's as soon as we step on the ice, I'm going to make your life hell and be the least favorite person of every opposing fan base in the entire league. And when he's off the ice, I'm sure he's a nice guy. So I guess my initial reaction was going to be he actively went and like sought out Panarin, grabbed him, and then like ragdolled him. And he did that with malicious intent. But it's something that he saves for when he's on the ice. So I feel conflicted here sitting at the end, but
it is. I can believe that he wants to make Panarin's life hell. He wants to make the opposing team's best scorers afraid to touch the puck, afraid to see him anywhere near like 30 feet of them. And he also wants them to go home perfectly healthy and capable, but you have to pick your priorities there and choose your actions to match what those priorities are. And he clearly has not done that.